Hello again. I'm now so privileged to welcome to the stage our opening keynote speaker and guest of honor, Dr. Tamim Al-Barghouti. Tamim Al-Barghouti is a Palestinian poet, for those of you who don't know him, which I would be surprised, who is widely read throughout the Arab world. His poetry readings are attended by thousands, sometimes packing stadiums and amphitheaters, and his poems have had several hundred million readers and viewers on old and new media, winning him an exceptional celebrity status in the Arab world. Since 2007, Tamim's work, Fil Quds, became something of a household poem. Palestinian newspapers dubbed him the poet of Jerusalem. Sections of the poems have been even ringtones, and school children compete in memorizing and reciting it. During the Egyptian uprising of January 2011, a TV recording of Tamim's lyrical poem, Hanit, was projected in Cairo's Tahrir Square every couple of hours on makeshift screens, despite the internet being down and regional news channels being banned. Tamim published 7 poetry collections in both colloquial and classical Arabic, including Mijana, Al-Manzar, and Fil Quds in Jerusalem, 1 volume of selected poems translated into English, in Jerusalem and other poems, and 2 academic books on Arab politics and history. He received a PhD in political science from Boston University in 2004 and has since taught at Georgetown University, the Free University in Berlin, and the American University in Cairo. He was also a fellow at the Berlin Institute for Advanced Studies between 2007 and 2008. And worked with and at the United Nations from 2005 till 2006, and from 2011 till 2017 again. He currently has his own program with Tamim on Al Jazeera's digital platform AJ Plus in Arabic. So please give him a hand. I would like to thank all our audience and our keynotes for being here and giving up the stage to Dr. Tamim Al-Barghouti. Thank you.
مرحبا. Good evening, and thank you for having me. It was not easy getting here, so much so that I was offered to speak next year if I couldn't make it. Nonetheless, I did. Last time I spoke in this conference was in 2019. Since then, the world witnessed devastating pandemics, earthquakes, and wars. Millions lost their lives, and millions more their livelihoods. Time is infinite. Our time is not. Humanity's main conflict is against death itself. From love to medicine, all art, science, and politics are attempts at having people live better and longer lives. At this scale of mega history, morality and utility align. Deeply immoral positions become practically infeasible. Slavery, racism, genocide, tyranny might benefit their perpetrators, even if those perpetrators might benefit their perpetrators temporarily, but even those perpetrators recognize that a generalization of such moral evils would put them, as well as the rest of humanity, in jeopardy. Oppression is as dangerous to the oppressor as it is to the oppressed. Many of you attending will soon have enough power to make important decisions in this conflict and that is why I come to speak to you today. Our region's fortunes are often its misfortunes, and vice versa. Rich in resources, at the crossroad of three continents, and at the center of religions, beliefs, and ancient mythologies commanding the imagination and emotions of many beyond its boundaries, this made it so that war is as common there as peace. Oppression, breeding resistance, and often victims, triumphant, turn into oppressors themselves. Palestine has long been at the center of this cyclical story. And it would be difficult to understand the current situation and its prospects without focusing on al-qadiyya al-markaziyya, the central issue, as the Palestinian plight has long been called in Arabic. Yet, my speech about Palestine will be different from the usual, from an Arab point of view, that is. While many Arab commentators maintain that the current situation, the policies of the State of Israel and its occupation are not morally defensible, I add that they are also practically not feasible and unsustainable, even for Israel. In the few coming minutes, I will argue that the flames set by Israeli settlers to Palestinian villages near Nablus signal an end to the whole Israeli project that has started in similar scenes 3/4 of a century ago. After 75 years of displacement, dispossession, direct occupation, or indirect occupation through client authorities, Israel as a project has failed. It failed to establish a Jewish majority in historical Palestine. Palestinians in so-called Israel proper, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, all controlled by the Israeli military to varying degrees, from siege and control of sea and airspace to total annexation, outnumber Israeli Jews today and are projected to outnumber them even more in the coming decades. Ministers in the current Israeli government speak of Negev and Galilee, Naqab wal Jalil, in the same tone as the West Bank. It failed to become a safe haven for the Jewish people. Rather, it has become, sadly, one of the most dangerous places for Muslims, Christians, and Jews to live in. Israel's Prime Minister himself keeps referring to the region as a tough neighborhood. It failed in securing a final victory against its Arab adversaries. Since 1967, Israel has not decisively won any armed conflict it was involved in. The War of Attrition in 1968, the October War of 1973 did not end in definitive Israeli victories. The first invasion of Lebanon in 1978 ended in a withdrawal. The second invasion of 1982, codenamed Peace for Galilee, replaced Palestinian forces in South Lebanon with more efficient Lebanese ones. And the campaigns in Lebanon in 1993, 1996, and 2006 failed, as the ones against Gaza in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021. They failed in achieving any of their preset political goals. 700,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and the fact that Gaza can go to war without Ramallah, but Ramallah cannot sign a peace treaty without Gaza, make the two-state solution practically impossible. And even if it were to occur miraculously, it is very unlikely to be sustainable. 2/3 of the population of Gaza and 1/3 of the population of the West Bank are refugees from beyond the Green Line. Democracy, as did happen in 2005, might bring to power parties who reject the peace treaties that deny such refugees their right of return. But such peace treaties based on security cooperation with Israel would be the precondition for the existence of such a state of Palestine in the first place. Hence, a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza would unlikely be democratic. Democracy would threaten its very existence. No democracy, no transparency, and therefore the state would be structurally corrupt. Corruption leads to the concentration of wealth. So even a two-state plan aiming at bribing ordinary Palestinians into redefining themselves and their homeland won't work. And such Palestinian state would be no better than the current Palestinian Authority, neither achieving independence for its Palestinian subjects nor security for its Israeli masters. In fact, democracy and armed conflict would break out again and again. In fact, democracy would be an existential threat to the Palestinian regime in a two-state solution, as it is an existential threat to the current Israeli regime if it allows the Palestinians it rules by military decrees in the West Bank or by siege in Gaza or by exile in the diaspora to vote for or against the Israeli laws that shape their lives. In fact, Israel does not recognize any government but its own to have any sovereignty between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. Yet, it rules more people who cannot vote by virtue of having the wrong religion than the people who can by the virtue of having the right one. It is a one-state solution, but one state for the Jewish people and the Jewish people only. That expression, for the Jewish people and the Jewish people only, belongs, by the way, to the current Prime Minister of Israel, not me. This one state for the Jewish people and the Jewish people only over all of mandatory Palestine thus runs up against the problem of Palestinian demography. The current Israeli government and the increasing right-wing tendencies of the Israeli public seek to counter these dangers to Israel as a project by calling blatantly and openly for another Nakba. An Israeli minister calling for the burning down of a Palestinian village is but an echo of chants by Israeli masses, even in football games. Mavet le'aravim, death to the Arabs. And an echo of the actual death that befell so many Arabs 75 years ago, the event that allowed Israel to exist in the first place, that which Ilan Pape and Avi Shleim from the left and even Benny Morris from the Israeli right would agree to term the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. If demography, which is a fancy word meaning that there are too many Palestinians in Palestine, is the main threat, and if the two-state solution is no longer viable, and if a new Nakba is the Israeli government's answer to this dilemma, then it is easy to see how the region is running quite quickly towards a major explosion that will be even more destabilizing for its political systems all around Palestine than the original Nakba of 1948. I'd like to remind you that within 10 years of 1948, all the regimes around Palestine were toppled, from Egypt to Iraq, with no exception. A form of gradual transfer is already happening. Transfer being the gradual forcing out of Palestinians from the West Bank. A form of gradual transfer is already happening, where the Palestinian population in the West Bank is driven to be concentrated in few towns, named Area A under the Oslo Accords, leaving the strategically valuable countryside to the de facto annexation by Israel. But the Palestine of today, demographically and strategically, is not the same as it was 75 years ago. Neither is the region the same. While an attempt by Israel to violently contain the Palestinian demographic threat is real, an Israeli victory in such an attempt is not a foregone conclusion. Instead of fighting regular armies of British and French colonies only nominally independent in 1948, Israel will be facing a multiplicity of guerrilla wars on many fronts, a type of war most regular armies have a poor record in winning in the past 50 years. Also regionally, such Israeli policy of demographic containment evolving into gradual transfer or military ethnic cleansing, of course, aggravates the pre-existing legitimacy deficit with which most Arab states were born. It would cause more Islamic movements to appear throughout the region. Obviously, the hegemony of a Jewish state where all Jews are potentially citizens by virtue of their religion is an argument for the re-establishment of a caliphate, a state where Muslims are subjects by virtue of their religion. It follows that all peace treaties between Arab governments and Israel weaken those Arab governments and bring little military advantage to Israel. This strengthens the strategic regional powers. This strategically strengthens regional powers that are aligned against the Israeli government over those that are aligned with it. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, with economic and succession crises respectively, might not be of great help to Israel. And displacing 7 million Palestinians today, or attempting to do that, might prove much more complicated than displacing 1/10 of that number 75 years ago. Unless they change their alliances, Egypt might change. You might be surprised that one day it might become another Iran, and Saudi Arabia might ask the Shakespearean question, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Romeo, Romeo, why are you called Romeo? Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, why are you Saudi? Israeli governments failed to embody, and this is one of the biggest failures, and it's not political or strategic, but it is historic and more hurtful to humanity and to the legacy of an important part of humanity, the Jewish people. The Israeli government, the Israeli governments, all out, failed to embody the moral legacy of many Jews in the world, a community that has been long oppressed in Europe and whose resistance to such oppression resulted in some of the brightest examples of human ingenuity and grace. One of the core aspects of that legacy, also perpetuated by other oppressed communities throughout the world, is the belief that no one should be oppressed nor privileged for their ethnic origin, religion, descent, etc. By contrast, Israel is the only country in the world that grants citizenship based on hereditary religion. If the millions of Palestinian refugees were to become Jewish tomorrow, theoretically, they would have no problem returning. Israeli government apologists would counter that by saying that Judaism is an ethnicity rather than a religion. But then why would that ethnicity have a greater claim over other ethnicities that lived in Palestine before, during, and after the advent of the ancient Israelites? The claim is religious to its core. To accept it, one must accept the superiority of the claim of the ancient Israelites over everyone else who lived in Palestine, and then the superiority of the claim of the Jews who left Palestine after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century over those Jews who remained and converted to Roman paganism or to Christianity or later on to Islam. This Israeli argument also entails that one should also accept that conversions to Judaism by non-Hebrews whose ancestors had no links whatsoever to the land of ancient Palestine never happened in 2,000 years, and that all modern-day people of the Jewish faith, including Ivanka Trump, are direct descendants and exclusive heirs to Abraham. Without discrimination on the basis of religion, Israel wouldn't be Israel. It would have to change in law, name, and flag. To make this point clearer, let me resort to a prominent Jewish politician, Sir E.S. Montague. When Sir Arthur James Balfour, the British foreign minister, declared to the Baron Lionel Walter Rothschild in 1917 that His Majesty's cabinet views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, the only Jewish member of that cabinet, Sir Edwin Samuel Montague, worried by the declaration implying that the national home of the British Jew was no longer Britain, wrote, "I wish to place on record my view that the policy of His Majesty's government is anti-Semitic, and in result will prove a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country in the world." He also added, sarcastically, worried about Europe as much as Palestine, "Perhaps also citizenship must be granted only as a result of a religious test. To end, in the same vein of Lord Montague's position, ESQA, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Beit Salem have recognized that the political arrangement Israel established in historical Palestine between the Mediterranean and the Jordan is simply apartheid, a violation of international convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and the spirit and letter of human rights covenants and international law in general. Palestine is now the center of the regional political strategic arrangement that has been in place since the end of the First World War. It is an arrangement that is not practically sustainable, nor is it morally defendable. It is about to change. Therefore, I should end with 2 lines by Palestinian poet Ibrahim Tuqan, who wrote before the Nakba, predicting it. But I shall ask you to pay attention, as they can be a prediction of woe to oneself or to one's opponent. I shall read them in English translation with some license, and then in the Arabic original. Approaching is the day that turns black hair to gray. Your mansions and your huts, your walls of stone and clay, will change their dwellers soon. And if they plead and pray to stay a little longer, the walls themselves won't stay. Already late are those who wish for fate's delay. أمامك أيها العربي يوم تشيب لهوله سود النواصي، فلا رحب القصور غدا بباق لساكنه ولا ضيق الخصاص. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamim Al-Barghouti. It's been an honor to have you, and a beautiful word from you on your end, and thank you so much for all these insightful knowledge and information. I'm about to introduce our next guest of honor as well.